Welcome. This is our monthly truck stop webinar. They're presented every Thursday, second Thursday of each month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. These webinars are presented as an industry update for information purposes only. They do not qualify for CE credits. We do have CE credit webinars that are provided the first and Thursday of each, first and third Tuesday of each month. Check with our office if you need CE credits, but these webinars do not qualify for those. If you have any questions during this presentation, just type in the chat window and we'll attempt to answer it, or we will respond later after the webinar with an email to you that would address your questions, and if it's appropriate, meaning a general question, we'll share that with all participants in this. If you experience any auto problems or other problems with this presentation, please either write in the chat window concerning your problems and or call our office 800-741-4084. We'll attempt to straighten the problem out. We're going to look today, furthering from our webinar that we did last month, update affecting motor carriers and how the insurance industry can assist their insureds who are motor carriers. I reached out to Scott Murray, who I've known for a number of years. He used to be with the South Carolina Trucking Association and had done programs for them, and he and I have had him on programs that we've done before. He now works for a member of the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation, BB&T Transportation Services, in Greenville, South Carolina. Some of you know I've got 6 grandchildren close to Greenville, so I come in every now and then when I'm visiting them to visit Scott and Rhonda and the rest of the people in BB&T. He truly loves trucking and spends most of his time now helping a motor carrier dealing with their insurance needs and safety needs and those things. He provides more than a policy, and hopefully this webinar we get through today will help you or convince you that you need to do that also. We asked him to give us some subjects he feels would be beneficial to make sense of the ever-changing environment a motor carrier operates in, and he sent this information. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us today. He had a conflict, but we thank him for his thoughts, ideas, and input. One of the #1 subjects that we're dealing with today is truck driver shortage. As insurance providers, when you call on the trucking fleet, you will hear that this is most of your insurers' top concern. Where are they going to get the drivers that they need today? Not only today, but how about as they grow, the tomorrows of the world, the tomorrows that they might be facing with. This has been talked about for many years. It was kind of delayed with the quote recessions in 05-06 year, but now it raises its head again as the economy has come back and items there. During that recession, one thing that compounded this is that we lost a whole generation of drivers. The drivers who were 56 years old in 05-06 lost their jobs and or had their trucks repossessed, but now they're not going to get back into a truck. So we lost a whole generation of that. Our friend Dan Murray, who's with ATRA, that we'll tell you a little bit about later, tells a story of having a meeting with for part of the American Truck Association where you had truck company owners, and he asked the question, how many of you all in the audience have children in the age range between 20 and 30 years of age? About 2/3 of the room raised their hands. He asked how many of those children that you have involved in this business, in your business, work for you, and again about 35-40%, so Dan said, raise their hand. Then he asked the question, how many of your children are truck drivers? Nobody raised their hand. So it's not even appealing as a career for owners of trucking companies. Some of you know my father was a trucker, and he took the money he made in trucking to go to provide me a college education, so I did not have to be a truck driver. That's the sentiment. The problem's increasing. Today there are more loads available than drivers who can deliver those loads. I was meeting with a trucker the other day who said, and this was just this week, there's going to be a lot of fruit, oranges, and produce in Florida, we're based in Florida, next year that will rot because they will not be drivers to move the freight. And that is the thing where that's the economic impact on the motor carriers. Most of the time, the insurance underwriters require at least 2 years over-the-road experience and 23 years of age before considering to work for an insured trucking company. I've said often, and some of you might have heard me say it in my presentations, that a truck driver is born 23 years of age and 2 years experience. The problem when you read this, and that compounds things, is that they cannot be a over-the-road truck driver until 4 or 5 years after they graduate from high school. So what do they do in those 4 or 5 years? Do they get training? Do they work for a local delivery company? Do they get involved in it at the local level before they become an over-the-road truck driver? Do they work for a trucking company who has operations locally, intrastate, that can build them in? Or do they go work for a construction company, sell shoes, other things, and either make a success or fail in those positions? Most of the time you'll find that in that 4 or 5 years, if they started in another vocation, another job, was making good money, they're not going to leave that to be a truck driver. So we get a lot of people who have failed in other ventures into our industry, and that's the problem. What do we do with these younger people as they come out of their high schools to convince them to be a part of the trucking industry? The American Trucking Association is doing a great job advertising how favorable it is to be a truck driver, and is putting information out trying to encourage people to have an interest within the industry. The truck and insurance industry have to find a way to work together and find common ground. As a percentage of our country, total freight volume continues to increase over the highway and compound the driver shortage. Now, clearly, you here who are involved in insurance, particularly underwriters and insurance companies, I'm not here to say that we should be insuring 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds in trucks that are operating over a 300-mile radius, that are staying overnight on our highways driving by themselves. We have to be aware that that is not what I'm talking about, because I totally agree with you that there's a sense of maturity, there's a sense of operations in those areas that we are not comfortable with. Younger people just tend to be more careless and tend to have more accidents. So that's not what I'm saying. Yet we've got to be a part of the solution, not the problem in this. Companies must find ways to attract the drivers they desire. And again, once they get them, they must find what works for them to retain these drivers. That's a key component here. We're doing a series of presentations for the Truckload Carriers Association, and one of the things that we're discussing with our insureds, the motor carriers who are members of the Truckload Carriers Association, is what are they doing to retain a driver. Statistically, it says that statistics show that to replace a driver, at the very minimum, it costs $2,500. That's to do the advertisement, to weed out the applicants, to screen them once you get them, and doing all the requirements from the DOT to make sure they can drive behind the wheel, including drug tests and MVRs and medicals and those things. Or as high as $6,000 if you count in the lack of production of the truck that they're driving. So retention is a big factor, and again, in the insurance industry, we pay a lot of attention to retention. Generally, drivers with longer tenures with an individual insured, driving over the routes, comfortable with equipment, are involved in less crashes. So again, we recognize that, but the trucks have to move, and so we don't always maybe get the ideal person as we work with our insurers to answer this question of who's going to drive these trucks. The motor carrier who understands their value to their customer realizes this, meaning retaining the driver and keeping assistant drivers, and they're seeking more pay to move the freight from their customers. That's one of the things that are happening in this industry, and the hauling rate, the amount of money the motor carrier is paid to move freight when they're loading. In the last reports that were furnished that I get on a weekly basis, says that they're averaging $2.10 to $2.30 a mile to move freight. We all remember, or some of us who are old enough, most of you who listen here aren't old enough to remember when our insureds were getting $1 a mile. That's almost 2.5 times what that happened there. They need those extra dollars because everything has cost more money, from the trucks to the fuel and things. So our insureds are telling their customers, look, if you want consistent service, if you want us to be here when you need her here, and you want us to deliver your products in a timely manner and take care of those, then we have to have enough revenue to have good trucks and to have good drivers. And so this is helping as we go through here. A lot of it has to do not only with drivers, driver pay, but we all know the cost of fuel. Motor carriers are doing everything they can to get new drivers to work for them. I listen a lot to XM radio. No, I don't listen to Howard Stern or the Playboy channel. I don't even pay for those things, but I listen to a lot of sports. And if you listen to XM radio, you'll be aware, particularly if you're involved in the industries that we are, of the advertisement for truck drivers. 20 or 30% of all advertisement on the XM radio is for truck drivers. Why would you do that there? Because a lot of truck drivers have XM radios, because that way they can keep a consistency in the programs they listen to across the country and not be dependent on the local radio stations. Today they get sign-up bonuses if they have a good driving record, if they have a good history with inspections, and their pre-employment screening program will reflect that. If they have a good MVR, if they had experience, from $2,000 to $5,000. They're guaranteeing pay now over $50,000. They're also advertising new trucks with all the new equipment involved in it. They're promised to get home more often, and they're told they can get 401k and health insurance. Listen to those advertisements, and you'll see what is happening and how far our motor carriers are going to retain or to attract good drivers. And then once they attract them, hopefully this pay package that we just went through would keep the driver retained. However, this puts an extraordinary pressure on smaller truck owners who have to hire from the general population. They've already hired all their kin folk and all their neighbors and their trucking companies, but now they have to get out and attract drivers from the general population. How can they match these big carriers' pay, or even the services the big carriers can provide to the shippers? And so this is putting an extraordinary pressure in that area. Projection pay for drivers in the future are talking about 6 figures, yes, approaching $100,000, and that is projected in the near future. And of course, that's again the shortage of the drivers. You have the old supply and demand situation, and right now, as long as the economy keeps growing, the demand for drivers and the demand for transportation is increasing. So therefore, our motor carriers hopefully will be able to generate more revenue per mile and more revenue from their customers, and that will be passed down to the truck drivers themselves approaching this number. There was an article in the Grand Rapids, Iowa newspaper the other day, and I'm going to actually be there next week, about the trucking industry driver shortage. It encapsulated, said in recent years the truck driving industry has been hit hard with driver shortage. Shortage likely will begin to have a serious negative effect on the industries that are dependent on moving their products from point A to point B, or dependent on the raw material truckers brings them. Recent numbers have estimated that the trucking industry is experiencing a shortfall today of 30,000 drivers, meaning that there are 30,000 trucks sitting there that have freight to be hauled that cannot move because there's no one to sit in the seats, crank the engine, and drive the truck. In the future, by 2020, yeah, that seems like a long time from now, but it's not all that long, that number is going to explode to be 330,000 additional jobs that are needed. So where are these drivers coming from? The potential for long-term career earning is good too. Drivers who stick with it will make between 60 and 80,000 per year. I project even higher than that, I just said. And this is a great difference. If you were looking and talking about truck drivers in 02 03 time frame, I would have said, and I have said this in presentations that some of you all have been with, a driver would have an entry level somewhere around 32,000 and a maximum somewhere around 45,000. That's up drastically now. Again, a reflection of both more revenue being generated by our motor carriers per mile and more pay to our to their drivers, reflective of that, to not only attract them but retain them. There's little faith that throwing money at the problem, though, takes the question or answers the problem about shortage. In fact, surveys have been shown and asked truck drivers why do they no longer want to be a truck driver. Pay is usually third or fourth on the list. The number one is getting home on a regular, predictable basis. Number two is the type of equipment that I'm driving, and I'm uncomfortable with equipment, just like some of y'all who look to your employment. A part of who you decide when you look at change employment is what's the facilities they're going to have for me, and how good is the office space, how convenient it is, and those things. Third is, and some of y'all can relate to this, particularly you who call on trucking companies, how well is the dispatcher, and am I treated as a part of the company and not as a problem? And then lastly, then the fourth on the list again would be the driver pay. Experts state you can give them all the money in the world, but if you treat them like crap, they're going to leave you. And that's what we're talking about, training the dispatcher or the people involved with our drivers to take care of them. Be honest with drivers about what they should expect in terms of days away from home. Number on top of the list, why I'm not a truck driver, days at home. Shifting of the culture that has made spending time with family more important strikes close to the heart of the driver shortage. People just don't want to be away from their family. In fact, I'm dealing now with asking people to speak for us in advanced truckers, advanced underwriting coming up, and one of the conflicts is, Tommy, I'd love to teach with you, but my child has a softball tournament, and I feel it's more important to be with my child at that softball tournament than teaching or presenting or being a part of your program for this particular time. Call me later. That's the attitude that we have. To ask someone to be away from home for a week or two at a time, or even more, living in a truck basically as an over-the-road truck driver, meaning they're over a 300-mile radius and they have to stay overnight to make $75, $750, or $800 a week. It's tough. The time at home is more valuable than maybe the $100 or $200 more they can make driving that truck, being away at home, sleeping in the cab, fighting the traffic and the weather, than a job they can get closer to home. And increasing that, the new federal safety regulation that went into effect in 2013, they limited the number of hours a driver can drive or be on duty. This is again negatively impact compensation for drivers who are paid by the mile or by the revenue. Projections show that the capacity of a driver, because new hours of service, of the truck, because new hours of service limiting the time that drivers can work, reduces the productivity by 8 to 10%, again compounding the driver shortage and also affecting their revenue. Drivers may experience several hours of downtime for which they are not being compensated, and they can create a desire to leave the industry. There's some discussions now, as Scott Murray relayed to me, of pushing in Congress and all for the drivers to be paid for waiting time, not by percentage of the time. The trucking industry, the interstate trucking industry, is also an industry where the minimum wage and or overtime has different factors than if you were a normal employee working in a steady job at your location. Interstate trucking has some exceptions in those areas, and as the whole question about minimum wage and what a person makes, these concerns about how they get paid is increasing. In fact, the recent Transport Topic article that I read says that a number of trucking companies are now paying by the hour, not by the miles. Those are companies who have great control over the truck operation to be able to do it that way. And I think in the future we're going to see more of that. It would help us in the insurance industry because we always know that when you're paid by production, meaning miles or revenue, the driver tends to push the envelope, particularly in speed and maybe even hours of service, to maximize their revenue. If they're paid by the hour, then there is less opportunity for that, and therefore typically the driver is willing to and operates within the parameters set up and ones that we want to live with. While it's easy to point out what might be causing the driver shortage, this article from the Grand Rapids paper, finding solutions seems to be a tickler, and that's the question. I've had calls from a number of agents this recently. What's the insurance company doing about drivers coming out of driver training school? Again, they're funded, they're advertised. In fact, in Grand Rapids, when I'm up there, I stay at a hotel, and across the street from the hotel is a driver training school that is provided by the local community college. Thoughts on this part is that younger person with no real experience going through that driver training school, and now there's more certification in that area, and there is certain times that have to be both classroom times and behind the wheel times involved in those things. But at least they know how to shift gears. At least the graduates know how to back a truck, understand all the regs and rules. Are they ready to be put behind the wheel and say, take this load from Fort Myers, Florida to Seattle, Washington? Absolutely not. However, they do have some experience in that area, and again, something for them to do as they matriculate between their high school to community colleges to trade schools into this area. Also, thoughts here is, can some of this new available equipment help the driver be safe? Or one of the problems that we have had is the drivers are in strange locations. They don't know the routes. They don't know how to shift the gears. They don't know how to do those things. Now we have equipment that can be able to put lane deviation warnings, so if they go one area away or the other area, they have these automatic stops that you can put in the truck. If it gets too close to a vehicle in front of it, the truck stops itself. There's GPSs that tell the driver where to go and how to find a location, so they don't have to read a map, so they don't have to have been there 3 or 4 times. Automatic transmissions takes care of the problem of shifting the 12 and 16 speed Fuller engines and the old Mack tandem shifting gears. We can watch their activities by talking to them on the radio communication that tells them if they have any questions or gives them suggestions, or even talk to them about where how their delivery time is, to warn the customer about when the trucker is going to be arriving there, taking the pressure off of delivery. And we even have the cameras involved in the trucks. In fact, one of the major riders of trucking insurance is now giving the trucker these in-cab cameras as a part of their program, again, to watch the drivers. No, it's not going to take care of experience, but we need to recognize in the insurance industry there are things that can be done mechanically, technically, that makes the driver safer, to watch the driver, to monitor the driver's activities. How can smaller truckers, though, use these graduate drivers if they then also train them? That's one of the problems. The bigger trucking companies, which most of us do not write, most of those have some retention basis. They're the ones who take these drivers and work them through their program. They'll have driver training programs. They'll ride along for a period of time with more experienced drivers, and they'll monitor those. The smaller trucker with 4 or 5 trucks just can't do this. And now with the larger fleets paying more money, and they've got to attract these drivers, nor does those smaller truckers tend to want to pay this extra dollars on their equipment to make things easier for the drivers. This is what we're balancing. And so we have to check if anybody's using these graduates of driver training school. Do they have their own training, and if so, what that is, and the equipment to tell our insurance company. There's not any easy answers, and I'm just floating the question. But one of the things we cannot do, I believe, in the insurance industry is ignore it. I would hope that we can get on top of it and start thinking about it, and then develop a partnership with our insurers concerning this. One of the other problems we have is truck parking. All of us have been on the highway. We've seen trucks parked in different various places. There's just a limitation on where a truck can park. And now with the increased hours of service, hours where now a trucker has to take 34 hours of rest after they have driven 70 hours or 60 hours or 70 hours depending on the time frame. They have to rest 10 hours after they have worked for 11 and 14. Where are they going to park? Are the areas safe for the truck to park there? There's not enough of them. The Federal Highway Administration is focusing on resources for truckers to park. And part of the new transportation budget is to provide more areas. Yet, as I drive often from Atlanta, Georgia, to where my kids live in Clemson, South Carolina, there are 2 or 3 rest areas that are closed down just because the state cannot afford to keep them up. So that's the balance we have. And truck operators to get involved and supply information to the Federal Highway Administration on this important project would be important. Scott giving me this information has encouraged us in the insurance industry and in the motor carrier industry to talk to our congressmen and let them understand how important it is to have places for their drivers to park safely, where the driver is not in jeopardy for to be hurt while they're there, for the cargo to be safe. The hours of service regulations, though, put a different pressure, where a driver can't drive more than 11 hours or work more than 14 hours. That after 70 hours and 60 days and 80 hours and 7 days, a driver must not drive for 34 hours, and these 34 hours have to have 2 periods with 11 a.m. to 5 a.m. There is a recent Transport Topic article that the American Transportation Research Institution has done a study, and there are majorly conflict with the hours of service rules that have been passed, and the study the FMCSA relied on to justify these new regs. I suggest that you download go into the ATRA webpage and download this study to understand more about this. It is not helping the driver. In fact, it is based on their information hurting them, and the financial impact is great. But that's what we got to live with. That's being policed and monitored. And we'll let people like ATRA and the FMCSA and lawyers and the American Trucking Association and IATA and the Truckload Carriers Association fight the technical legal battle. But our insureds have to live with this, because if they don't, they're going to be stopped. And if they're stopped, and they have gone outside the hours of service, and they do it too often, again, impacting smaller truckers more, they're going to have an alert. And once they get that alert, or the second alert, now they're going to have a tougher time hiring drivers. They're going to have a tougher time getting loads from shippers. And we know in our industry they're going to have a tougher time to buy insurance, and sometimes even if they can buy it at a higher cost. So we have to live with it until some of the bureaucrats, some of the people far above our great pay scale can take care of this. But this is also compounding the shortage, because again we're losing capacity. It also has an effect on the problem of parking, because now they have to park not when they find it convenient, but they have to park whenever they run out of these time frames. Impacting also smaller truckers. When I dispatch a load, if I work for a trucking company, a dispatcher, when I call that driver up, I have to find out how many hours they had worked, either the 34 or the 10 since they had last stopped. I need to project where they're going to be in 11 hours to make sure they're parking there. Tell the driver where they can park, because I want it to be safe. I want the cargo to be safe. And then where will they be when they're going to run out of their 60 hours in 7 days, or excuse me, 70 hours in 6 days, or 80 hours in 7 days, so that they can have a restart, not in a location where they'll have to sleep in their cab or even a motel, but back to where they would be at home. Those are things that a trucking company dispatcher now has to contemplate as they send that truck out of their yard or take that first load, starting their time frame that they can work after their restart. When parked, how will the driver stay comfortable? This is another. Anti-idling laws. you can download this, and I did it this today on ATRA. They have actually a little cab card that you can laminate and put in the truck about every state regulations of how long a truck can idle. That means run their engine, blow the smoke out of the smokestack as they're parked. It's not in the heavy traffic. Most states or counties have regs and rules that they cannot idle more than 10 or 15 minutes. Again, that's not a standard. You have to look at every county, every state, every city to that as part of it. So what the motor carrier has done is they've added an auxiliary power unit to their trucks to run their heating, to run their air conditioning. This is kind of ironical because when I was selling trucks some zillion years ago, back in the late 60s and early 70s, before we developed the ability to run air conditioning units off of the engine, we actually put auxiliary power units on trucks to run the standalone air conditioning unit. Is coming full cycle now. Even though we can run the air conditioning and the heating off of the engine, we cannot run the engines anymore, so we have to have this auxiliary power. Let's provide that. Well, will it provide more than heating or cooling or both? Will it run the computer, charge the cell phone, the TV, and other things? When you hear some of the advertisements of Sirius Radio, one of the things one of the trucking companies advertising for drivers has said is, we have these auxiliary power units that can not only keep you cool, keep you heated, but run your computer, charge your cell phone, run your TV. We did a program in Phoenix last year where we had a trucking company that said that they don't have an equipment that does all those things, because once you start doing the cooling and add these other things, the unit cost triples, and so they're buying a less costly unit just to keep their driver heat in, because we don't want them to freeze and not these other things. Again, that would depend on where the routes that you're running and do you need the cooling area. If you went through Arizona in the summer or Florida in the summer, then I'm not sure that the cooling is not as important as heating. But the heating is the real concern you have. In fact, they had a story that they told that one of the things that made them look at this closer is they had a FedEx yard close to their operation, and there was these trucks that were parked on Friday ready to work on Monday, and they walked through there, and about 30% of the trucks had their auxiliary power units running, so that when they get in the truck on Monday morning, it would be temperature controlled. That's a waste of fuel, a waste of everything. So again, this is the battle they're facing. Are insureds using this? Does it attract more drivers? How are they using it? The other thing we have to consider is, in the physical damage, has we kept these auxiliary power units as a part of the value and the physical damage? They run in excess, in some cases with the full-blown ones, of $10,000. So we've got to also have an insurance coverage question based on those units or those items. Most of you all have read the blogs and know that electronic logs or electronic logging devices are being mandated as a part of the MAP 21 program. This is going to be mandated. The final rule will be put out this year, and our insureds will have 2 years to adopt this. The fleet will be permitted to use existing ones for 2 years until they are done. All the publications that I've read and all the input I've read from American Trucking Association, Transportaficos, feel that the government did a good job on these electronic logs. But what's going to happen is that these have two major features in it that are important when you read the rules. The first one, the equipment has to have at least these characteristics. It cannot be tampered with, meaning that the driver cannot go in and change it, move it, erase it, modify. And second, it has to be able to be downloaded by a DOT officer, so that when they get stopped, the DOT officer can download the exact activity of that truck. There's also provisions written in here where the driver cannot be harassed because of these hours of service regs. But it's now going to have the driver hours working closer scrutinized. The larger fleets have been using this for a long time. In fact, one of our members in discussing with him, the number one safety item that he has found his insurers have done is using electronic logs. Drivers who have used this like it because now they don't have to do paperwork. If you go into some of your insurance SMS scores and CSA and look at their hours of service basic, you'll find that the high percentage of those hours of service in the basic is not for driving too long, it's not for working too long, it's not for taking the restart, but simply paperwork. Either lack of paperwork wasn't current, or in some cases, the one that causes us the most problem, they have falsified their logs. Electronic logs take care of all those things. So now the driver doesn't have to worry about his or her keeping the record up to make sure that he or her put the right location, the right town, the right bar code as they go through way stations, as they end of every day, some other thing they got to do, because now the electronic logs will take care of those things. However, for smaller truckers, there has been a tendency, and this is why their trade association, IATA, has had some resistance in electronic logs, is that now there's more scrutiny. They cannot press the hours of service to increase their income. This is a concern they have, so now they're going to be regulated, and so they cannot vary and push them loads without having a greater chance of getting caught. Major concern. Shippers will also have pressure not to hold up the driver to load and unload, and this gets back in the comment I made earlier about driver pay. While the shipper is not being able holds a driver and they have to sit there 3, 4, 5 hours just to pick up the load, just to get moving, that affects their hours of service regulations with the 14 hours they can work, and now electronic logs are not going to allow them to, quote, modify those hours to not reflect those loading and unloading times, because all that stuff counts before you have to take the 34-hour restart break. And so now the shippers are going to be in more pressure. In fact, there's a lot of discussion that if the shipper is not aware of this, if the shipper loads a trucker and the driver cannot achieve the delivery of that load within the time frame the shipper requested it and within the speed limit requested, then the shipper could be held liable in the case of court cases. One of the things that we all know if we have insureds who are shippers and read all the discussions from the lawyers that we deal with is that shipper liability, broker liability is something that the plaintiff's attorneys are pushing to get more dollars. And this is another way to push that, where the shipper does not respect the regulations and provides loads that will require a time frame delivery that would violate these rules. Again, the electronic log devices that are going to be mandated will have a great impact on how to retain drivers, how to monitor the drivers' activities. Another thing that Scott mentioned is the conditions of our highway and bridges. The National Highway Trust Fund is broke. This was reported on. Will be broke by August 2014. There's a lot of discussion in Congress now about how to refund those. Conditions of our highway and bridges vary from state to state. States that have higher gas and fuel taxes appear to have better roads. I use the term appear, but there is a major gap between states' fuel taxes. As I mentioned a number of times in this presentation, I get to South Carolina often, again, to visit with my 6 grandchildren up there. As I live in Fort Myers, Florida, I fill up with gas in both South Carolina and Georgia on the way back to the airport in Florida. The South Carolina fuel that I filled up 3 weeks ago up there was 40 cents a gallon less than what it was in Fort Myers, Florida, and 25% less than what it was in Georgia. Again, that's not a function of the cost of the fuel in most cases. It's a function of the fuel tax tied into the state road funds or fuel tax funds in the states. And I am not aware of this as much as Scott relayed to me, but he says when you look at the roads in South Carolina, they're in far worse condition than most other states. Again, I didn't say that. Scott said that. So if you're South Carolina bureaucrats or live in South Carolina and want to send nasty letters back, don't blame me. Blame Scott. But anyway, but that's a fact. We've got to consider these things. It ties up congestions, which again affects the hours of service, driver retention, those things, and the highways not being in good condition tend to contribute to the condition of our equipment, and also to crashes because the roads are not properly banked, they're not properly asphalted, and those things. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to support that. What increased cost of vehicle operation as a result of the conditions of the roads is undetermined. Some state that it costs the average motorist about $250 a year per car in maintenance costs because the roads are not kept well, shock absorbent tires and those things. Everyone needs to get behind to fix our road efforts and find the solutions to fix our crumbling highways. This is a problem because this is going to take money. This is going to take taxes. In fact, one of the ironical parts about this is the American Trucking Association has suggested to increase the fuel road tax. In other words, what they're saying here is our roads are in such bad condition, our bridges are so bad condition. We who use this trade association who represents the user of these roads, the most prevalent user of these roads, the trucking industry, we're willing to pay more. But we want to pay it based on a percentage of the usage of the road. So increase the fuel cost. Increase the fuel cost and increase the taxes, and then we will pay that extra dollars because it's important to our business to have these roads in good condition. So, but there's no sentiment for this in Congress because they're saying, well, it's raising taxes. Yeah, but the taxes need to be raised because our infrastructure needs to be repaired. If passed, they also want the American Trucking Association to make sure that any increase goes to fixing the roads and bridges. And here again the question is, can we trust Congress if they raise it and states if they raise it to spend the money on the roads and not on balance the budgets from other shortfalls. So that's the balance. But road condition is a major concern for vehicle maintenance, for crashes and congestion. So driver shortage, lack of parking, bad roads with increased congestion. How do we also address some of these? One of the things that's being proposed is allow larger truckers on the highway. Just recently read an article or two concerning this where larger trucks are being allowed now, like in Maine, where doubles and triples are being allowed on the East Coast. That maximizes the productivity of the truck and of the driver. It is said in states that allow doubles and triples, there has not been an increase in crashes. In fact, in some cases, there have been fewer crashes. One of the things that happened in our insurance industry when they were proposing these large configuration vehicles and they were trying doubles and triples, we, the insurance industry, said, whoa, maybe we don't want to do this. But in retrospect, those seem to be a better operation. And there's reasons for that. The first reason is doubles and triples can only be used on interstate highways or the corridors close to it, meaning warehousing and parking right off within a couple of miles of the interstate highway. That's where we find all of our truckers safer if they stay on the interstate highways. Based on one of the last causation of accident reports done by ATRA, one of the top, in fact, twice the predictor of a crash than speeding is lane change violations. Well, if you have a double or triple, you're not going to swing in and out of lanes. You pretty much stay in the lanes. Thirdly, these vehicles are generating more revenue per mile. Most of the time, our drivers get a percentage of that revenue per mile. So the driver driving doubles and triples typically will get paid more money for their time driving than someone who's not driving those things. So they can attract more drivers. So in fact, what's happening is these operations are safer, and that takes fewer trucks now and drivers needed to move the same amount of freight. with these larger capacity vehicles. This is a big concern, and we're going to see a movement to that, again, in answering the questions about where the driver's coming from, answering questions about lack of parking, concern the congestions on the highway to keep some vehicles off of it. We're going to see this as a move in the future, and it's something we need to study, but I don't think it's something that we should be concerned about or aware of. That's what we see in the fairly new future. Let's talk about something that blew my mind when this was said. Steve Bryan of Vigilo. They were at our Motor Carriers Insurance Education Annual Conference. We hope some of you all participated in that and heard him. We are going to have our second annual conference this October, and this type of information he developed and others will be presented. We hope you all put on your calendar, save the dates, and show up in Orlando in October to hear experts in our industry to keep us current of what's happening. We have a dynamite program set up, so please look at our website and see what we're doing. But what he is saying is Gigolo will be the provider of transportation in the future. What, a software company? Yeah, because we'll have driverless trucks. Man, that is mind-blowing to see a truck running down the highway and having no driver in it. But their project is now, with all the equipment they have and those kind of things, that they can have trucks with no drivers on them and can move from point A to point B. There's now, even in Europe, you have a truck train where you have a truck in front with a driver in it and 2 or 3 tractors and trailers in the back that are tracking that truck in the front with no drivers in it. All of it trying to move more freight with fewer trucks and fewer drivers. In fact, some of us have seen this advertisement that Amazon is suggesting delivering package with drones. So what they have, and you've seen 60 Minutes had an article or had a program a couple of weeks ago about drones, and we have had all the discussion about the drones that are being used in military and how somebody sitting in Utah or Louisiana is dropping bombs on people in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran and those kind of things. But this is the wave of the future. Why are they driving here? Why are these people, Gigolo and Amazon, spending money there? Because they can't find the drivers, and it costs too much to move freight now. You see a lot of the advertisement on the railroad and how they can take care of this. But as Dan Murray, again, our feature speaker at our annual conference, will tell you, there's no way the railroad can ever meet the truckers' needs in those areas. There's some other proposal here in the same area, and that's the short haul swap drivers syndrome, where you send a driver out 200 miles and another driver coming from other directions 200 to 300 miles, and that driver meets at a truck stop or at a rest area, and they swap trucks, one finishing back to where they started in the morning. Both of them do that, swap with another driver. This again will allow them to be home more often, again attracting more drivers. The point I'm making here is that there is a lot of discussion on trying to meet the needs of the shippers that we deal with, in recognition of the driver shortage, the road conditions, and those kind of things, the hours of service they have to work. They're coming up and thinking of innovative ways so that they can still move the freight from point A to point B with fewer drivers, fewer trucks, and with all these regulations. Not an answer to driver shortage and bad roads, but something to consider. One other, intermodal increases. This is where we can move a lot of freight over bigger mechanisms and bigger areas and intermodal. One of the problems in our economy is that we're getting a lot of the items from the Far East, China, Japan, those areas, and those areas now of larger container ships are coming into West Coast ports. If you have read and followed it in the trade journals and on the newspaper, you should know that the Panama Canal, as we speak, is being enlarged. So the Panama Canal by 2015 will be able to take these larger container ships that now have to stop in the west coast through the canal and take their products from the China, Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, all this offshore manufacturing that's being done, India and those places, through the canal and unloaded on the east coast ports where it's not only less costly to get into the port, less costly to load and unload in the port, but also closer to some of the population areas, particularly in the Northeast. So ports that are on the East Coast, from New Orleans, Mobile, the Tampa, Miami, Lauderdale, all up the coast, Jacksonville, Savannah, Charleston, Newfork, into the New York area and even Boston area, it's projected that those ports will have a great increase of intermodals. Again, now the large bulk of movement is being done by larger means of transportation. And so if we can get these products closer to the population, then it takes fewer drivers and fewer trucks to move it from those ships to the population. In fact, one of the things that are happening in South Carolina, again, because of the congestion here, is that they're building an inland port where they're going to move the items from the Port of Charleston into an area around Greenville, South Carolina by rail, and in Greenville then truck will pick it up because that's more centrally located and there's easier to get highways and away from some of the congestions that you find on the I-95 corridor. All these things are happening, again, reaction to our road conditions, to driver shortage, and those kind of things. We're here, guys. This is May 2014. So the certified medical examiners and the driver medical cards will be effective before the end of this month. May 23rd, 2013, FMCA issued a proposed rule to require medical examiners to electronically transmit the medical examination results to FMCAs, who will in turn transmit them to state licensing. Currently, the drivers or employers are submitting the medical certificates to their SLA, to their state local drivers themselves. This proposed rule is expected to reduce medical fraud and the burden the driver has to keep the medical card with them. In July 2014, they extended this deadline for another year. So the driver will no longer be allowed to use the medical cards to prove medical qualifications and roadside inspection because some states were not ready or prepared for this. They put it off for a year from now. But effective May 21st, 2014, folks, that's 3 weeks from now, drivers will have to choose a medical examiner from a list of certified examiners who are approved by and have been certified by the FMCSA. The industry concern was that are there going to be enough certified examiners available? And there was a push to put it off. But recently, in just the last week or two, Transport Topics, that question arose, and the FMCSA said there is enough examiners, and they're not going to delay the enforcement for medical examination to be done by someone who's a certified medical examiner. You can go onto the FMCS website. For you who are not familiar with it, most of you all are familiar with SAFER. That's the middle column in SAFER. When you go into SAFER on the bottom, you'll see company snapshot. If you look just a little to the right, the column on the right, the top of that column, FMCSA website. If you click on there, you can go into the certified medical examiners link, and you can find a national register of certified medical examiners. You can put in your zip code and look at and see who the local certified medical examiners are. It has a default within 25 miles of that zip code. In preparation of this talk, I went in to look at our area, and there's some 35 medical examiners within 25 miles of Fort Myers that our truckers can use. So my suggestion here is that you might want to do this in your location. There's a definite going to be a pressure, though, on trucking companies who are in small rural areas. Probably a lot of stuff in the Midwest and in the Midwest, even Iowa, Montana, states that have fewer populations than your insured are sitting there. So you need to look at and see how many's there, but you can look now at the people who are now currently certified. The FMCSA website states these are the fact sheets concerning medical examiners. This is what makes up the National Register of Certified Medical Examiners. The National Register of Certified Medical Examiners is a federal program that establishes requirements from healthcare professionals that perform physical qualification examinations from trucks and bus drivers. Why did they put this in? Simply because they were aware of and concerned about the driver or the trucking companies influence these medical examiners and wink drivers and pass them. In fact, a part of this study is a lot of accidents were caused by unfit drivers. To become a certified medical examiner and be on the list of medical register, the health professional must complete training and testing, keyword testing, on the FMCSA's administration, physical qualification standards and guidelines. So they got to know the rules. The National Register ensures that medical examiners sufficiently understand how FMCSA's medical regulations and guidance applies to the commercial motor vehicle drivers. That's any driver 26001 driving a vehicle 26001 GVW, hauling something hazardous, or hauling more, driving a vehicle with more than 15 seats in it. This was created to enhance commercial motor vehicles' health and reduce highway crashes and because of the information from the National Truck Safety Board showed that a lot of crashes were due, or a number of crashes were due to the driver not being fit to drive. Indicate the improper medical certification of commercial motor vehicle drivers with serious disqualification medical conditions has directly contributed to fatal and injury crashes. So again, to improve the health of the drivers. Impact of medical examiners. Medical examiners that are currently perform or wish to perform physical examinations for interstate and commercial motor vehicle drivers must complete training about FMCSA's physical qualification regulations and advisory criteria and pass a certified test to be listed on the registry. Medical examiners that pass the certificate test will receive a certificate as proof of successful completion and will be on the list. Certified medical examiners will be online. You can again access it through the FMCSA website. Only certified medical examiners will be allowed to perform commercial motor vehicles driver qualification exams after May 21st, 2014. Again, less than 3 weeks from now. Only those drivers certified issued by a medical examiner listed on national will be considered valid by FMCSA, which means that they will be cited both by a violation and fines for being unfit for driving a vehicle if they do not have their medical exam done by someone who was certified, and the motor carrier can be held or could be also cited and liable for fines based on that. Once certified, the medical examiners must comply with training, testing, and FMCSA administration requirements to maintain on the list. The medical examiners must take refresher training every 5 years and take certification tests every 10 years to remain on the list. It doesn't say you have to be an MD, though. You can be anyone in the health delivery system. So you need to let your insurers know about the end of the month that physicals for drivers must be done by a medical provider on the list. Strongly suggest that you get an email or other communication with all your motor carriers, particularly the smaller ones, and remind them of this problem. They need to check with their current provider to see if that provider is on the list or not. If they're not on the list, they need to find one that is on the list so they can use them. Sometimes we have the motor carrier has the driver bring in their own physical as a part of the employment screening. After May 21st of this year, because the physical is required to be no older than 2 years, the motor carrier now has to review that medical exam report closer. So when a motor carrier is looking at a certificate provided by the driver, the motor carrier must see when the exam was done. And if it was done after May 21st, 2014, they must check to see who did it and was that provider on that list. So during the next 2 years, a motor carrier must review who performed the exams of the driver, bringing in their own card. Remember, drivers include owner-operators, independent contractors. Here again, typically, the motor carrier might provide the physical for employees, but not independent contractors. They'll get their own. So again, they need to make sure that the examiner the independent contractor uses is on that list. Suggestion here is you don't tell them who to go to, you tell them how to access it or give them a list of a half a dozen in the area so they can use those. Important, the medical examiner will be educated on what is required. They will be held to a higher standard. They could be liable if they miss something, if what they miss caused an accident. That's the liability. So the cost of the exam in all likelihood would increase. Smaller motor carriers, again, more pressure because now they have to screen it, they have to find the driver, and they're just saying, all I want to do is drive my truck. So again, to conform to these things, particularly when they start hiring drivers, it's going to be more. The more qualified examiner is projected to take a number of drivers off the road because they can't meet the requirements now that are being looked at more closely, again increasing the driver shortage. There's also an announcement of the drug and alcohol clearinghouse that we talked about before. So the written comments again on May 21st, 2014, this is going to require all holders of drivers of commercial motor vehicle who holds drivers or hires drivers with CDLs to report any failed or refused drug tests to CIDLS in Plano, Texas, and before you can hire a driver, you must check to make sure they have not had a drug or alcohol violations. Again, Congress mandated this as a part of the MAP 21 program, and it's going to affect the pre-employment provision. Again, restating the hours of service. Just point out there's a lot of controversy now that is not right. ATRA just has come out with a recent report I will commend you to talk about the problems, but that's something that the bureaucrats are going to have to talk about, not us. We have to live with them. Some of the people will remember when the Federals came in to perform a safety audit compliance review in the early 70s, they would ask a motor carrier if they had any DOT reported accidents or roadside inspection during the past year and look at it. Why were they asking these questions? Simply didn't have the information. Now you've got the information on the web, CSA. The motor carrier is going to be visited 3 times. When they're a new entry, they're going to be visited within 12 months. When they have an intervention because their CSA scores are on an alert, then they're going to be visited here. Even though the CSA is under attack, it's flawed, yet officers use it to determine who to look at and who not to look at. They'll be visited with a no rating, but there could be a fine if found something bad. They could be placed on an alert, and that alert stays with them for a year. Now, drivers, shippers, insurance have a problem in their relationship with a motor carrier who has an alert, so that's happening more often. You could have a full compliance review that will be affected in a rating that is now satisfactory, conditional, unsatisfactory, or the majority, about 75% of everywhere with MC numbers have a non-rating status. Again, that is looked at to be changed, projected in the safety fitness determination later in the year. We'll do a webinar based on that. In conclusion, we all have watched TV and seen the recent ads. Name your own price. If you mayhem or use cat litter. Well, I'm looking here on the cat litter. We got to provide more than a piece of paper. Providing of insurance to motor carriers. We must stay current with the regulation. We must help particularly smaller motor carriers with information about the regulations that affect them, like the new medical examiner certification that will be effective before this month's out. We got to explain to insurance carriers what our insurers are doing as they relate to these regulations, particularly as they get used to them, like electronic logs and those things. These sessions that we're providing every second Thursday at 2 a.m. as well as the blogs and white papers, are designed to provide members of the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation and the Transportation Risk Specialist designees to help them be aware of these changes and how they affect the insured. The next truck stop seminar will be presented on Thursday, June the 12th, 2000. We're going to have a subject there, underwriting and insuring warehousing risk. These webinars are open to our membership only. If you have any questions or interest in membership, contact us or call us. Thank you for your time. I apologize for being a few minutes over our hour. We hope this was beneficial to you. This webinar will be posted on our website that you can download for future references or to share with other people. You all have a nice day and a nice week. Thank you very much for your time. I'm done.